So Doom Patrol episode 8, titled Danny Patrol, I'm pretty sure debuts the first live action appearance of Danny the Street, and this was a very, very enjoyable episode. One way to sum it up is a line from Larry himself in this episode, and that is, Donkey Dimension, D Creator, group therapy, you just have to ride the awesome wave that is this show. So let's break this episode down. What is up, Doom Patrollers? Welcome to a brand new review and breakdown for Doom Patrol episode 8, titled Danny Patrol. As always, you know what I'm going to say, very, very enjoyable episode. At this point, I don't think there's going to be a disappointing episode of Doom Patrol. We are over the mid-season mark now, kinda, because there's 15 episodes in season 1, and this episode took some really, really cool steps forward, especially the ending with the underground. But, you know, introducing Danny the Street was a very, very, very cool thing to do. And from what I know and from what I have read about Danny the Street, alongside, you know, learning about Doom Patrol myself through this first season, they really nailed the character, if you will, on the head. But before we get into all the nitty-gritty details, guys, be sure to subscribe if you want to stay up to date with Doom Patrol breakdowns just like this and other comic book nerdy stuff. Check out some of my other videos popping up in the cards above. And other than that, like it, as it really does show your support for the channel, and every like seriously does help out this video. So thank you if you did go ahead and do that. But let's start off at the beginning. That's where we had the Bureau of Normalcy. They showed like they showed the perfect beginning really to this episode of what Danny the Street can do, because he's quite literally a sentient street. I guess you guys have watched the episode, so you've kind of gathered that by now, who can teleport anywhere in the world. And Danny the Street is a superhero within himself, if you will, or regarded as by a lot of people as a superhero, because, you know, he kind of provides that place for people to go to, or, you know, picks people up who have slipped through society's cracks. And if I remember correctly, they're called Dannyzens. And that's what I really loved about this episode. And I felt like, you know, this place, especially that scene with Larry later on, you know, it really made you think that this place would be a perfect fit for Larry in that kind of dreams sequency moment that he had. So right at the beginning, we saw the Bureau of Normalcy trying to go after Danny the Street. The Bureau of Normalcy, as you may know from watching this episode, are essentially this agency who go after anything that is, well, I guess not normal, or they like deem abominations or whatever. And they just, you know, want to completely eradicate anything like that from the world. Danny the Street being one of them. But, you know, they also linked in Larry Trainor's past, and that's what I loved. You know, one thing I do go on about every single episode is, and one of the best things about Doom Patrol is the way they develop their characters, something that a lot of other shows don't do. A lot of shows are good in other areas for action and, you know, some character development and stuff, but Doom Patrol seem to, you know, make sure that there is no story point, you know, that is unfed. So that beginning scene where Agent Wilson was walking through Danny the Street just gave you a great first impression, you know, where Danny communicates through basically anything and everything within that street. So we had floating leaves saying welcome friend, and just all kinds of other things shaping and shifting into letters. So after the end of last week's episode, guys, I'm sure you won't forget about Admiral Whiskers chewing on a few wires and Cliff's head attaching to his brain, which is, you know, provided the whole explanation behind why Cliff was really acting out that episode. We saw Cyborg help fix him together. He felt a bit bad about, you know, how he spoke to Jane last episode. And this was quite important in terms of what happened in this episode and where Jane has gone, because whenever she's feeling particularly low, there's this persona, one of her 64 personas or personalities, whatever, that comes out called Karen, and that was a whole like ballpark within itself that was very entertaining in this episode. So this episode had two kind of sides to it, or maybe three if you will, if you include the Larry connection. Now the painting at the end of last episode wasn't addressed so much in this episode. I do want to just touch on that for a split second in terms of how in that robot man scene with Cyborg where he was helping him rewire and, you know, just saw himself out from the previous episode, he did mention it, and later on in the episode we got you know, Larry talking to Cyborg about don't let Mr. Nobody get in your head? Is this just an attempt of Mr. Nobody's to get in each individual Doom Patrol member's heads? That is something that's been made very prominent, and how this Doom Patrol isn't going to end up like the previous Doom Patrol. But is there something more to this painting? And I think there is. It's not just a Mr. Nobody tactic. A lot of you guys in the comments from last week's episode thinks that Grid might actually be potentially going to one of the comic book storylines where it could actually end up pretty bad for Cyborg and how Grid will develop. And that's why, Cyborg's father is very cautious about letting him having full control of the Grid. And I really like that idea as well. They could actually do that. And this could be actually a storyline that they might go down, considering the painting depicts how Cyborg has killed the whole Doom Patrol and his father. But we're going to have to wait and see where that goes. So Larry's flashbacks back to 1963, I really did enjoy those. They gave us basically his first ever kind of interaction, or his first discovery of the negative energy, or the spirit as he calls it, because the Bureau of Normalcy kind of wanted to manipulate that energy so they could use it themselves. We see him getting tortured. We see like the Bureau of Normalcy testing how much temperatures he can withstand, and it was absolutely really freezing, and he was still absolutely fine within that room. And then they wanted to use him because the Red Menace was threatening, I think it was someplace in Nevada, and they wanted to send Larry out there to deal with him because a lot of people's lives were at stake. But other than that, I thought it was really cool when the energy came out and just started effing the Bureau members up who were torturing Larry in that room. But other than that, there wasn't really too much more to the flashbacks in this episode. I'm guessing they might revisit this, maybe not the Bureau of Normalcy, but more flashbacks of Larry training before the chief found him. Now, before we get to the Karen stuff in the episode, as Rita explains, who is a love-struck psycho obsessed with 90s rom-coms, who goes after this guy called Doug, who she split up with many times before for obvious reasons, probably being that, another personality comes out. But either way, yeah, I want to talk about the Danny the Street stuff before we revisit that. Now, as we know, more or less the whole premise of this season is to find Niles Calder. Sure, we got him back, but it was only temporary from Mr. Nobody. So the Doom Patrol clutching for any clues they can. So when Danny sent Cakes to the house, they wanted to know what Danny could possibly know in terms of helping them find the chief. So when they got there, of course, they were greeted by Danny and all the different kind of, fantastical kind of things going on that he could do with his own street. They also met Morally Corrupt, I believe the full name was, and she basically explained how Danny was a genderqueer street. She also gave the explanation in terms of how, people who have basically been disregarded by society or feel like isolated or different, this is the perfect place for them. I love the joke that she threw at Cyborg, by the way. If you ever want to get out of Westworld, I love Westworld, and that was just a perfect reference to that. And who knows if we'll see Danny the Street again in a future season, but in the comics, Danny the Street does evolve into Danny the World, and I believe even Crazy Jane goes and lives there for a certain time. And basically, I feel like any Doom Patrol member, it would be a perfect fit to live in Danny the Street, because they all feel like freaks or like isolated, or just basically slip through the cracks of society, as Maura Lee Corrupt put it herself. So it goes without saying, Cyborg and Larry at first were a bit kind of bewildered, or I don't really know the right word, fascinated with what the heck was going on with Danny the Street. Of course, they got the explanation from Maura Lee Corrupt, who, by the way, got revealed to be Agent Wilson. I felt kind of stupid. I didn't actually realize that, but I thought that was a really nice story in terms of how the Bureau of Normalcy had an agent, going undercover there, and he actually loved the place so much that, if anything, he found himself there. And despite Cyborg and Larry needing Danny's help with Chief, Danny needed their help because he was essentially on the run, and he couldn't put up with this forever, running away from the Bureau, because the way they kind of explained it, and I'm not mega familiar with this myself, I did look into it before filming this review. Morally Corrupt explained how Danny the Street keeps going the more people thrive in his street. So if it stops, then his heart can basically no longer take it, and maybe he will die. That's at least the insinuation that I got from it. And also, this storyline with Danny the Street and the Bureau of Normalcy is straight out the comic book storylines with Darren Jones coming after Danny DeStreet quite relentlessly. So I feel like this episode did, as always, a very, very good depiction of, you know, what is in the comic books to live action. Now, at this point of the episode, I didn't necessarily blame Larry for being a bit kind of worried about helping Danny DeStreet against the Bureau of Normalcy, because he's literally been tortured. We've already talked about those flashbacks. And, you know, they did have a little argument between Cyborg and Larry about, you know, I thought you were over being like the scaredy kind of lion or whatever it was. And, you know, even Larry kind of did a big burn at Cyborg in terms of that painting. But, you know, that's when we got offered that moment in the Perpetual Cabaret with Larry singing on stage. And I thought that this was a very empowering moment in the show, and just for Larry's character in general, because it was not only was it a fantastic scene, I did not expect this. I feel like this sums up Doom Patrol very, very, very well. I was actually even disappointed when it turned out not to be real, because, you know, Danny, or at least in Larry's mind, I was thinking Danny gave Larry a temporary ability to look like himself, and he went up on stage and started singing. The song choice and lyrics really appeal to what the people of not only Danny DeStreet go through, but what Larry has gone through. I just think in this moment I felt so happy for Larry and so sad for him at the same time, because he's so happy in this moment when they're all singing and just thriving, and you see the more and more people in Danny DeStreet coming into the Perpetual Cabaret just loving and accepting one another. I don't want to get too wish-washy on that, but this moment was, I feel like, really important for Larry, because this is what I feel like he's been dying for: the acceptance, the love, the joy, just everything that Danny DeStreet provides. Even though I haven't got onto the Karen part of the episode yet, I also loved how that kid came up to Robot Man. He wasn't allowed in Doug's house, and they started doing robot dancing. The kid was dressed as a robot as well. That was, I don't know, the way they kind of shoot these episodes, and whoever directed this episode, it was just such a beautifully shot montage, if you will, between Larry singing on stage and everyone swaying and dancing, and then we had Robot Man. Beautiful, beautiful way of filming it. But this is when Darren Jones arrived, the guy who just keeps going after Danny DeStreet, who relentlessly, Morris comes up with the idea to return to the Bureau, say he was deeply undercover, but Danny just refuses to let him go. And this was a really, really cool scene as well, where she literally whooped the ass of Darren Jones. And it was a really cool moment for Larry as well, because he kind of confronted his kind of fear of the Bureau of Normalcy, and even said to the guy, you know, tell the Bureau that Larry Trainer sends his best, and just knocked him the F out. Now, understandably, when Cyborg had that conversation with Danny talking about the Chief and how he's been taken by Mr. Nobody, as soon as Mr. Nobody was mentioned, Danny was just like, I can't basically get involved, you know, I have to protect these people here. But he did give him like a clue, and that was actually a My Greatest Adventure comic in January, issue 51. Now, personally, I'm gonna probably go ahead and read this to see if there's kind of any teases. Basically, there must be a teaser or a clue in this story that Danny DeStreet gave to Cyborg that must kind of, you know, help answer his question in finding Chief. Yet again, another very meta thing in the show, because this is a real DC comic, but this isn't anything new. I mean, I love it, but this isn't anything new, because for crying out loud, Mr. Nobody breaks the fourth wall and talks to people like us with subscriptions to a service like DC Universe. So another really, really cool thing, and it's just so weird seeing Cyborg hold a DC comic. Now, I don't have a massive amount of things to say about the Karen part of the episode. It was just a whole bunch of funny stuff. I mean, she basically went to Karen's personality, as I mentioned earlier, because that's what happens after, I guess, Jane is feeling very low, very stressed. She tends to come to the surface, but her ability is to essentially entice and infatuate any person with Karen. And I really like that effect, because that's why, despite Doug getting broken up with, again and again and again and again, he always accepts her back because of her ability. She even used it on Rita at one point in the episode. She used it on the parents, and at one point they were even going to get flipping married. What I will say about this part of the episode is that Diane Guerrero's acting is just, she is fantastic. I mean, we haven't seen Karen before, but what I will say is that she was hilarious. She was very different from Hammerhead, from Jane, and the Hangman's daughter. There's quite a few she's already shown. I've seen quite a few people in the comments say, I do love this show, I do love Diane Guerrero and her acting, but I wish they would like show more than just a few personalities. I think this is more than acceptable. It's not like they can use all like 64 of her personalities in season 1, so I'm sure they're going to kind of maybe hold back on maybe the Hangman's Daughter next season and introduce a whole other one for her to work on. She's a fantastic actress. I'm sure she can handle even more personalities, but you kind of have to be realistic and just select a few maybe in the first season. And I don't think there's any complaints to be had with her. She is definitely, I think, maybe the highlight of the show for me. Karen did reveal at one point in the episode that the way Jane talks about Cliff to Karen, he means a lot to her. I don't know if she was just saying that, but I do low-key think that is true. I think that Jane does care about how much Cliff has shown interest in her, as much as Jane doesn't show it. I think that is a very true statement from Karen. But this is when Cliff stopped the wedding and Karen was getting dragged into the underground, which is essentially the network of all the personalities, the 64 personalities that Jane has. Now, the next episode will be featuring the underground. It's actually called Jane Patrol, episode 9 of Doom Patrol. And I've actually got the synopsis written down here, and it's Jane retreats into the underground, a treacherous place deep within her own mind space, where she encounters her many personas and dark traumas of her past. So that's going to be a very, next episode is going to be the Jane episode. I mean, that's why it's called Jane Patrol. But I found this, a very cool ending to this episode. She was essentially left catatonic because I guess there's no, profile selected, if you will. I guess that's kind of a good analogy. But the next episode will also feature all the characters, guys, like Brendan Fraser as Robot Man, but actually as Brendan Fraser. I think somehow they're going to go into the underground, and you'll be seeing the people for who they are, because it's not actually like reality. So that's why we're also not only going to see Brendan Fraser as Robot Man in like his Robot Man jacket, but we're also going to see all of, well, maybe not all of them, but some of the other personalities of Jane in the underground, but not looking like Jane, but actually looking like what they're supposed to look like, for example. I'm extremely hyped for it. As I just said a minute ago, Diane Guerrero is one of the best things, and her character is so interesting, Crazy Jane. So I'm also just looking forward to seeing Brendan Fraser actually not as a stunt double on the screen and just voice acting, but himself in the flesh as Cliff Steele, like in the flashbacks, be on screen as well. So that's going to be awesome. We actually get to see him, I guess, most of the episode. But let me know what you thought of this episode anyway, guys. I very much so enjoyed it. There wasn't like a massive bunch of development in terms of Mr. Nobody, Chief, and stuff like that. Maybe a clue with the comic book issue. If you want to talk to me directly about Doom Patrol, be sure to join my Discord server. The link to join the server is in the description down below. Other than that, thank you to all my patrons appearing on screen for helping me fuel the content that I create. You guys absolutely rock. Links to my Patreon is in the description as well as my social media if you want to follow me on there. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. I'll see you Doom Patrollers in the next video. Goodbye.